Morning. Camera is doing a weird thing for me today. All right, I had a software update. Every time there's a software update with Apple, it always goes a little nutty over here with the cameras. I had like whole zoom in. All right, just have to turn off the zoom ins. That way, doesn't look like you're talking just to my chin. Welcome to our Shulchan Aruch class. After we've been chatting for 30 seconds. Today we are in Siman Kuf Mem Gimel, or 143. The rules for if you find a Sefer Torah that has an oopsie in it, okay, meaning there's some type of error in the script itself, and other rules about the book itself, the scroll. So let's start. It's not very long. Let's see how we do today. So the first halacha, number one, Ein Korein b'Torah b'Pachas Misar. You need at least 10 people in order to read the Torah. They must be of the age of majority, meaning above age 13. They must be free people, meaning they can't be people who are servants. And if you start with 10 and someone walks out, you can finish, which is a cool rule, right? As long as you start with 10. So what does that mean? Okay, or what does it mean to have at least 10 there? So the Mishna explains, because reading from the Torah is considered, as we have spoken in the past, a davar she b'kedusha, and the general rule is one may not have less than 10 because of that verse by the Meraglim, V'nikdashti b'seich b'nei Yisrael. I shall be sanctified in the midst of Israel, and we learned that there is this gezeira shava, toch, right? The word's toch, so it's b'soch b'nei Yisrael, and it says in another place, Hivdalti mitoch ha'ida, again by the Meraglim, right? So we say that since the sanctification must occur with 10 and the Meraglim were 10, we therefore learn that you need at least 10, okay? And that a collection is not less than 10. Gedolim, what do we mean by that must be a majority age, which is to exclude those who are 13, who are less than 13 and 1 day. So even though a child can be included in the number of the 7 people who are called to read from the Torah, we're not going to learn about that until Siman Reish Pei Beis, or 282, when it comes to laws of Shabbos. That does not mean that they're counted in the 10. So just hold off on that. You gotta get 10 adults. Okay, so B'nai Chorin, they have to be free people to exclude people who are slaves. Now, even though slaves have gone through a conversion process, this is me meta halachicking over here. The Mishnah doesn't say that. He says to exclude servants. They are not considered part of the 10 because they have basically been compelled for conversion. Now, then the final rule is if we start with 10, okay, that means that you have to start reading. So the Mishnah quotes the Pri Megadim and saying if you only said Baruch Hu and you haven't started reciting the Torah, that doesn't count. Okay, so if people goes out. Now, you also, not only do the people leave, but you also have to have the majority still there. So at least 6 people are there. And you don't need an obvious majority, just a simple majority. And for people who are leaving, there's a little curse that we apply to them, says the Mishnah. Berurah, Ozvei Hashem yichalu. Okay, that the people who leave Hashem shall be put to an end. So even between people, you shouldn't be leaving. And it is permitted to leave between people, meaning there's going to be at least 10 there. Okay, so don't ditch the minyan. Okay, so we say you can finish it, and we're talking about during the week. Okay, so which means that during the week, you have the 3 that you can finish. On Yom Tov, you can finish the 5, and on Shabbos, you can do the 7, but you can't add more than the 7. Okay. And then after that, you can recite the Kaddish, but you can't have someone called up for maftir, okay? Because it's considered something else and would need another 10 and isn't considered part of the service of the Kriyas Torah itself. And so too, a minyan does come back, you can't go ahead and do the Haftarah again later. Now, some people say that you can go ahead and recite it without the blessings. So let's say you have a different problem than Berurah says. Let's say you started with 10. You start reading the Haftarah at 10, and people leave, and you start the blessings of the Haftarah. Then you can go ahead and finish it. with the blessings afterwards. Okay, so that's halacha aleph. Let's move on to halacha beis. Now, it's an interesting rule about Torah over here. If you write a entire chumash, okay, so there was a time at which, before they had printed books, where people would simply write each book in a simple scroll. So this way, if you're walking around, you don't have to carry the whole set with you, right? You could just take one volume. So when it's the chumash, you just take the one scroll. You don't have to take all 5 of them everywhere you went. So if you have a case like that, even if they're written on a scroll like a Sefer Torah with all the other rules, you can't use that for Kriyas Torah. You have to have all 5 parts of the Torah stitched together. The Ramah adds, and they have to also be written on a scroll like a Sefer Torah, okay? So even if you have if you have the 5 singular books all together, okay, then they're printed together like in a book form, that doesn't count, okay? You can't say a bracha on that. Okay, and so actually what's interesting is he's quoting from different time periods. He's quoting from really early books. So some books were not printed, but they were scribal, written, but they were folio pages and weren't in a scroll. And so you would flip it open like a book. So that's because he's quoting people who go back as far back as the 13th century in this halacha over here. So he's saying even like that, it has to be written on a roll for a scroll. Now, the Ramah continues, if there's a Sefer Torah, and there's not a Shliach Tzibur, a leader of the congregation who knows how to read it with the proper tunes, Baal Peh, meaning orally, by memory. So the Ramah says, I've seen some people they'll read from the Chumash with the proper trup, and then the person who comes up after him will go ahead and read from the kosher scroll. Okay, so he'll like read the line. So like give him the line. He'll read it from the scroll, which we mentioned that in the previous halacha as well. That if you don't know it, they could kind of school you on it. Okay, the Mishnah Berurah says you shouldn't read from it because of the honor due to the congregation. Okay. Now our chumashim, which the Mishnah Berurah explains, they were not in a wrap, and they're also not stitched together with gidin, with the proper kosher stitches that come from the animal ligaments, and they also weren't written on parchment, and all the rules of the Sefer Torah. So those are all described in the Reish Samechs and Pays and all that, the Ayins and Pays in Yoredea. You should not make a bracha on that. So in a far-off community where they have a minyan but don't have a Sefer Torah, then they can read from these chumashim, these separate books, without a bracha. Okay, so that way people don't forget to read the Torah every week. But they shouldn't break it up to have people come up to read from the Torah like you come read and you come read. Okay, but one person should sit and read the whole thing out in front of them, so that way they should know it. Now, in the last thing, when we don't know how to read with the proper cantillation, you should repeat after him. So the Mishnah Berurah adds, and nowadays that one person reads from the Chumash quietly, and the Shliach Tzibur reads after him from the Sefer Torah, that's kosher. But why? Because not everybody knows how to read with the proper cantillation and all the proper demarcations of the lines. And so you recite it for them in order that they should repeat it publicly. Halacha Gimel. Okay, so and reiterating what we just mentioned in Mishnah Berurah, so in smaller villages that don't have a kosher Torah scroll, they should not recite the blessing at all. So Mishnah Berurah explains, so whether they have the Chumashim, the individual books rolled up in little scrolls, okay, which we just mentioned, or whether it's a full Sefer Torah, but it's not a kosher Sefer Torah. You don't make any brachas on that. And that's what the Mechaber holds, okay? And there's not even a reason for that case, even any type of a case of a great need, do that. However, we're going to see in a second that the Ramah holds that he brings two opinions to be lenient, and we're going to discuss it. So let's take a look at that. Okay, So this is the rule. If you find an error in the Sefer Torah while you're reading it, so you take another Sefer Torah out and start from the spot where you found the error, and you finish the reading for that week at that spot. Okay? And if you find an error in the middle of the reading, so you finish reading, the person who's reading finishes reading from the kosher scroll and says a blessing at the end and doesn't say another blessing at the beginning. Okay? So meaning that, so you finish the number of aliyos that are left, and according to the Mechaber, so you don't go back to the beginning again to start it over again. Now let's talk about the Ramah. So this is a nice long Ramah over here. It says, if you have already recited, or you have already called up somebody to read 3 lines, and you could stop there, you stop there, and you say the blessing afterwards, and then you take out another Sefer Torah and start with the new one. Now, when do we take out another Sefer Torah? It's when you find an error that is an error that matches all of our criteria. However, if it's when there should be like additional letters or missing letters, we don't switch Sefer Torah out for those things, because our Sefer Torah are not considered so perfect that we know the difference between when there should be an extra vav or an extra yud. That's what we're talking about in those cases. Sometimes it's read one way and written a different way. We don't take out the Sefer Torah in those cases. Okay. Yeah. So because there's no reason for us to say that the next Sefer Torah is better than this Sefer Torah with those cases. The Maharil gave a decision that one should not take another Sefer Torah out. Okay, and the Beis Yosef says that you do take another Sefer Torah out. Okay, and so therefore, at a time of great need, when the community does not have only has a Sefer Torah that is not kosher, and they don't have someone who can fix it, so there are those who say that one can still go ahead and have the public reading from that Sefer Torah, and you can also say the blessings on it. And some people say that's no good. Okay. Now, if it's one book out of the 5 in the Sefer Torah, doesn't have an error in it, so you can be lenient in that case and to read in that one book, even though there are errors in the other books. Okay, so you see an interesting rule over here about the Sefer Torah, about whether or not the whole Sefer Torah is ruined when you find an error in one spot. So let's talk about the strict rule of the Beis Yosef. Okay. So the Mr. Berurah explains, I have to give you a little bit of an introduction over here. So here we go. Most of the poskim hold that a Sefer Torah that's missing even one letter or one word or any type of other error in it is no good. You cannot read from the entire Sefer Torah. And according to them, if you find an error in it, even after you started reading from the 7 people who get called up on a Shabbos, you must go back to the beginning of that section of the Sefer Torah and read from there. Okay? And you have to say the bracha there again, and that is the kriya that is going to count for you. And the first stuff that you read doesn't count. Now, some people that says that even if it's missing a few lines, and especially if you find just any type of error, even at all, even if you haven't, even though it's not considered Sefer Torah, for the purposes of fulfilling the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah, right, because there's an error in it, nonetheless, one may still be allowed to hold the public reading from it if you don't have another one. So the Mechaber said in the previous halacha that you shouldn't take it out of the Sefer Torah to say a blessing on it, even in a place where you don't have another Sefer Torah. Okay? Because that's the majority of opinions that he saw. One should not do that. However, if you found the error after you started reading from it, and we see that the Mahari Beirav is one of the masters who came in the generation right before the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, he says that nonetheless you may rely on some of these lenient opinions that permitted you to read it and count that as your weekly parsha reading. and you don't have to take out another Sefer Torah. And many people have said that he's actually correct on this. Even though they say the majority opinion is not to do that, he said that in a case where you have no other options, that's fine. That would also mean that if you find an error in the Sefer Torah between people getting called up for an Aliyah, and you haven't finished all 7 people being called up, so what you have already read, you can rely on the lenient opinion and not read it again as well. But to continue reading from it is also not permitted, and you have to take out the other one and start from the place where the error was discovered. And you finish the last number of people in the thing from that number. Okay, so and they are considered part of the 7 who get called up for the Sefer Torah on a Shabbos, and this is again considered an after the fact situation. And later authorities add that nonetheless, if it's possible that you can go ahead and have the Sefer Torah read from 7 more people, that's even better as well, even if you're not going back to the beginning. And this is also if you already say the bracha on the non-good Torah, okay? But if you're in the middle of the reading and you find the error, and you've already read a bunch of verses, and so too, you haven't finished reading at least 3 verses, and if you finish the reading completely, until you finished saying the final blessing, you should not take the final blessing on the Sefer Torah. It's no good, okay? Because that's considered before the fact. So it's only when you discover the error afterwards. You stop the reading and have someone come over and he goes, "Yep, that's an error." But if you know it's an error and you say it's an error, okay? But if you stop the reading in the middle and you go get the Sefer Torah and bring it in, that we'll get the bracha afterwards. And then you have to read at least 3 more verses after that. So either go back and read again or read 3 more beyond it. And then you say the blessing afterwards. And that's what the Ma'ari Birav is saying, and even the Beis Yosef himself brings it. Now the Mordechai the Ramah says something a little bit different. He says if you've already read 3 verses, and you can stop there, and there's only 2 more verses left until you finish the end of that parsha. I mean, it's where the next big white spot is going to be. And you see the bracha achrona there, and then you take out the other Sefer Torah, and you have the remainder of the people being called, read from that one. And if you haven't had at least 3 verses from that, or you have read the 3 verses, but you still have only 2 verses left until you finish it, and you're not allowed to stop in the middle of a paragraph. So you should read from the errant verse, and you read it out loud, and finish it in the non-good Sefer Torah, say the final blessing, and then switch to the next Sefer Torah. Okay, so this way these people don't think that verses are missing in the Torah. On Rosh Chodesh, this would be a similar case where you have to finish the parsha for the day, that daily obligation, and you're not allowed to add more readers on that day by having a 4th reader. So when the error is in that 4th one, you shouldn't stop there to say bracha achrona, because then you're going to have to add another person to get called up from the next Sefer Torah. Okay, and so that's not a place where you're allowed to stop. You should finish reading in the non-good Sefer Torah and say the bracha achrona on that one. And the Ramah says he's kind of like making he's making up shara. Okay, he's sort of mediating between the sides and coming up with a middle ground. So his middle ground is if you've only read 2 verses, or you've read 3, but you can't finish the section with at least 3 for the next Sefer Torah, and things like that, then you shouldn't say bracha achrona, take out the other Sefer Torah, and finish the reading from there. And then you say the bracha on the new Sefer Torah. Okay? And that's similar to the Mechaber. But if you already read 3 Pesukim, and you could pause, then you can take the opinion of the Mordechai and say the bracha achrona on the non-good Sefer Torah, and then take out the next Sefer Torah. Okay? Now let's take a look at the Shulchan Aruch, what he's talking about over here. So, you find the error while you're reading the Sefer Torah. Okay? So you didn't read it yet. Okay? You didn't finish reading it yet. You only have some of the people done. Okay, because you finish the whole thing and then you find the error, you don't take another Sefer Torah at that point, because we can rely on the leaning to poskim in this case, even according to Mechaber. Okay, and so the Mechaber himself, Rabbi Yosef, is saying that you found the error in between people, and so therefore the people who've already been called count towards the 7 aliyos that you're supposed to have, and then any additional ones are going to be part of that as well. Okay, so you start over from the part where you find the error, which is to say, from the part, the place where the person who got called up, he stops there and finds the error. And that's why they say you start from that spot. And that's also the same rule if you weren't sure if that was an error or not, or you didn't inform anybody until you finished the reading, and you read 3 or 4 more psukim, so you only go from where you stop, okay? And since you read those psukim will count for you, even though it was from a non-kosher Sefer Torah. And so also, the people who were called are already considered part of the 7 that get called. And so too, on a Monday or a Thursday, when you need the 3, they also considered part of the 3 that are getting called. Nonetheless, if you can replace the 7 with 7 more, okay, however many you used up until you get 7 from the kosher one, that's better to do, but not on the weekday. Don't do that. Okay, and that's even when you pause in the middle of the reading. So even if you've already read a number of psukim, and you haven't recited the blessing afterwards, you should not absolve yourself of the reading you've already read in the Sefer Torah. And even though it's no good, and that's okay to do, because you can at least read 3 verses from a kosher Sefer Torah, and then after you can go finish. Which means to say, the Mishna explains that you read at least 3 more verses from the error spot. You also don't make a new blessing at the beginning, because the beginning blessing is already going towards the reading that you've done in the first Sefer Torah. So even though you've switched in the middle, you were still had in mind to read from the Torah and to read the entire parsha. So it doesn't matter which Sefer Torah is in front of you. Okay. So when do you switch it? The Berurah says you move from before you, and then he says the same rule applies as when you find the error between the blessing and the reading itself. You roll up a Sefer Torah, and you take out the other Sefer Torah, and the person who already made the bracha, he doesn't say another bracha, because it's like, I have several fruits in front of me, I'm going to pick a different fruit, right? I'll pick a different Sefer Torah. As long as you haven't spoken or done anything to take your mind off of the bracha. In a place where they go and say the bracha again, you shouldn't say that, because some people are even more strict like that, even though that's not the Mechaber's opinion. Okay. Now, in the Ramah, we said if you've already started reading, you don't stop over here. So this disagrees with the Mechaber. Okay, and they're going to say there are those who say. But sometimes, the Ramah writes it this way. Now, we say you can go ahead and stop over here, which means after these 3 verses, before you finish the end of the whole paragraph, where there's going to be a white space, you only have 2 psukim left. In that case, you shouldn't be taking out another sefer. You should finish that parsha, and then you can take out another Sefer Torah. Okay, and then after that, after you even if that's the end of the parsha, you make the bracha afterwards first as well, because the other opinion holds, the Mishna explains, that since I've read 3 psukim before I knew about the error, I have still fulfilled my obligation of doing a proper reading, and so therefore saying the bracha afterwards is now in effect, and I don't have to go and finish the reading in a kosher Sefer Torah. However, if I found the error after I only read 2 psukim, and then I can't say the blessing, so then everybody would agree that I should go take out the new Sefer Torah, read from that, and then say the new Sefer Torah. Now, in the Berurah Halacha, Mishna goes at length to explain that a number of later authorities say that this is really the best way to do it, is like the Psak of the Shulchan Aruch, okay? And if it's not a case where you have a minhag to say otherwise, so which is the lenient opinion of the Mordechai that we mentioned. So one shouldn't change their custom, and it's preferable to take the Mechaber's strict approach. So what we don't do is we think a Sefer Torah for maftir. So if you find the error after you finish the entire reading, and you said Kaddish, you don't take out another Sefer Torah, just to read maftir. And you say the bracha on the section you already read. But you don't read it in the Torah itself. You just read it Baal Peh. Okay, and we're going to see that that's the rule in Reish Pei Beis when we talk about maftir. Okay, and by maftir we're counting towards the number of 7 over there. So you say the Kaddish, and then after that you say the brachas on the Haftarah that are at the end. And if you don't know about the error until after you've already said the Kaddish, then you call the maftir up for the Sefer Torah, for this Sefer Torah, for 3 psukim without a blessing, and you don't say Kaddish again. Okay, and if you find the error in the middle of reading the 7th Aliyah, the Magen Avraham says you just finish the entire rest of the reading, and you go to the end of the parsha. Okay, and so too, if you have an additional one at the end, you should go ahead and finish that as well. Okay, so those are some of the rules. There's a lot going on here. Okay, so I think what we'll do is we're going to pause here because there's a lot going on, and I think we're going to pick up and start off with this halacha again. I'm going to spend some additional time going through this one because there's actually a lot more to go through here that will take a lot of time. So I want to make sure that we go through it in more detail than just read through it really quickly. So we're going to pause here at that little introduction, and we'll pick up with 143 halacha dalid next time. So you have an introduction about how we're going to handle dealing with these errors, and I'm going to go through slowly to really explain some of these rules in great detail instead of blowing through it at speed, because we don't want the class to go on for an hour. I know people have a lot of things to do. Thank you for joining today. Look forward to learning with you next time.